And we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Derailed with Arcaicskidz. I'm your host, Arcaicskidz. We have Mark Schneider on the program. Mark, why don't you tell everyone who you are and what you're about?
Let's see here. I'm Mark. I'm, number one thing is, I'm a husband and a father. I like to mention that because it's a big thing. I've got 6 kids, right? So I'm, here proliferating, making sure the population stays around. I've spent my entire adult life working in the nuclear energy industry. I did 20 years in the Navy, operating nuclear reactors on submarines like you see behind me, and one aircraft carrier. I retired from the Navy, and then I started working in the commercial industry. And then I became an advocate for nuclear energy. And I'm a man of such few hobbies that my wife, too, is also a nuclear engineer. Well, she's a nuclear engineer. I'm a nuclear operator. But, we have the nerdiest pillow talk, in the history of the planet. So that's just a little, 311 or 411 about me, I guess.
So. Nice. So we're going to start off with the most important question to everyone. Is nuclear power safe?
Nuclear power is arguably the safest energy on the planet. I think the only thing that may compete with it safety-wise is solar farms. Not rooftop solar is completely, out of the realm of safety. Nuclear by, deaths per they use a term deaths per megawatt hours. The amount of energy you produce, how many people died in the process of doing that energy, or the amount of deaths. And nuclear energy is the lowest, arguably down with the solar farms.
Okay. Since you touched on solar farms there, I don't see solar as a very clean energy. I think once it's installed, possibly, then you maybe it's better at that point, but the amount of mining and the operation to actually make it happen, plus all the batteries, I don't see it as a green tech. I just don't.
So you bring up a great point, and this is one of as a nuclear advocate, the big thing that I argue when it comes to people that are for wind and solar is that they only, you nailed it perfectly in stating that the whole, wind and solar as a whole are not really that green, because you're cutting down forest, right? Because you don't want trees in the way, even for wind, because you have to be 300 feet above. So if you could cut a 60-foot tree down, you've now reduced your turbine by 60 feet in length, and that's a lot of engineering to make it that tall.
Right.
And so just the removal of trees alone. Well, we're in the desert. Okay, well, how does that impact the desert? How does that, you look at these solar farms and wind farms are covering huge amounts of landscape. So there's that aspect. Then when you get into the mining, and then you talked about the fact that you need battery backup or some other backup, whether it's natural gas, nuclear, something else as a backup for it to actually function, right? And that requires a huge amount of mining. And the green folks won't talk about that aspect of it. They will only want to talk about insulation. That's the only carbon you could talk about. But they demand that me as a nuclear advocate account for every ounce of carbon that is produced in the process of mining and the process of transportation. And they'll even say, well, we're going to use battery powered cars. Okay, so why can't I use that argument in the nuclear industry? Well, because you're
right.
nuclear.
Yeah.
Well, all I want, and in the nuclear industry, the only thing as an advocate, the only thing I ask for is a level playing field. You give wind and solar subsidies, I want those same subsidies. You give natural gas subsidies, I want those same subsidies. Nuclear energy is has the least subsidies of all power in the U.S. Right? Every other power source receives more subsidies, whether it's through mining, whether it's through drilling, whether it's through construction. Nuclear receives the lowest of all of them. And if you look at a nuclear power plant, they're the most profitable per, energy produced. I think it's like 11.
Your dollar in for dollar out is a lot better, right?
Yes. The problem with nuclear, and this is you talk about the LCOE, the levelized cost of energy, is nuclear takes a long time to build. So it's like, I like using homes as a comparison, right? Nuclear energy is like building a castle that's going to last for, millennia, right? It takes a long time, a lot of labor, and you might not, I look at the CEOs who typically have a 5-year plan. You're going to be 3 CEOs into it before you're profitable.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, 15 to 20 years before that plan is profitable. But it's going to be profitable for, the NRC is evaluating licenses out to a century now. So,
Okay. So
so
you've got
a
80 years possibly of profit out of
you've
that
got
plant.
you've got 92 years of profit possibly because your
Well, that's
license
not
doesn't
bad.
begin till your reactor goes online. You're 20 years,
Oh, okay, okay. So you have a
right? Or, yeah, you
nearly a
might,
century then.
yeah, nearly a century of profit. But a CEO isn't going to be around for a century, right? But then
Right.
when you look at, wind and solar and natural gas and all that, well, they're like mobile homes. I go up, I buy it, I, put it in a place, plop it down there, tornado comes through, rips them all out, no one cares, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but that castle is going to last through earthquakes, tornadoes, freaking sieges, terrorist attacks, all that stuff, right? And everyone's going to,
Mhm.
and it's amazing when you think about the difference between them. It just blows my mind. Yeah, we want this cheap thing, but I mean, have you ever actually been to a mobile home and mobile home park and seen how run down they can be after 5
Oh,
years?
and yeah, and it does not take long at all. Their wiring is garbage. Yeah, I understand where you're going there. One of the things, and I just wanted the big Texas blackout that just happened a while back, and they were blaming wind and all these things. And I don't know, my understanding is some of the turbines had froze or something, and so they wouldn't spin, and that caused an issue. But the battle between the ideologies started so fast that it was insane to me that it was like no, it was natural gas fault, or it was they're not regulated in Texas enough, there's no federal oversight fault, or and then the Republican side of the argument was, well, see, wind and solar don't work, they're and this is the talking point that drives me insane about Republicans when it comes to wind, solar, things of that nature, is it's always the same argument. Well, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. Well, sure, that's fair, but that's not the only problem. So I don't understand why they don't talk about the fact they're not green. Those wind turbines in Texas hold 12,000 gallons of oil, and that oil has to be changed every 6 months. So that's crazy to me.
So, by the way, tell your viewers should all go to Google and look up Bleve, Bleve, and then
Okay.
look up wind turbine explosions, and you'll see some things that absolutely scare you.
I've seen
Because
some videos like that.
yeah. So I mean, but Bleve is when you take a container of fuel and it lights on fire and then explodes, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a crazy explosion. I'm a certified industrial firefighter, so we deal with all this
Nice.
stuff. So, but no, you bring up a good point. Now, here's the big thing that when I talk about wind and solar is the wind doesn't blow, sun doesn't shine all the time argument actually is not a great argument. What they really should say is that wind and solar are actually destabilizing the grid.
Right.
Right. And it's not because the wind doesn't shine and the sun doesn't blow. No, it's that you look at the cycle of energy throughout the day. The peak power is as the sun is coming down, which is
Mhm.
when your solar is dipping off of power, and it's 4 hours before your wind hits peak power. So the absolute maximum demand, you have basically minimum wind, minimum solar,
Right.
period. Right.
And that's
And so,
that's the evening, right? So you're between
and
6
that's
and 10.
and that's evening, and that's what California's found out with their rolling blackouts. Right. So
Yeah.
California has to do all their rolling blackouts. Oh, and I have a cousin who lives in Newport Beach. And Newport Beach, ironically, never has rolling blackouts. Oh, wait, that's also the really expensive zip code where all the big name people are. So all those
Mhm.
people, they basically have, you want to talk about those rolling blackouts mean that poor people aren't getting electricity,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's not affecting the rich, right? It's affecting the poor. And so, that's the lie that we're told when it comes to this. And so that's my big take, is it destabilizes. And going back to Texas, so Texas, you had a problem with wind, you had a problem with solar, you had a problem with natural gas, and you had a problem with nuclear. All four,
Okay.
right? And so one thing you'll find about me as an advocate is I'm honest about nuclear's problems,
Right.
right? The problem with Texas is that Texas was not designed for that kind of storm, right? Their
I
grid
don't
was
think
not.
most places are designed for that, but yeah.
Oh, yes, they are,
Oh,
right?
are
So
they?
that kind
Okay.
of storm rolls through Iowa all the time,
Well, yeah, that's
right?
true.
So Iowa, their infrastructure is able to manage that, right? They
Mhm.
have the de-icing on the wind turbines. If you look, there's a parallel where all the nuclear, all your nuclear coal, anything that uses a turbine, uses a steam turbine, they're all indoors, right? It's like the plant I work at, I live in Virginia, it's an indoor turbine. But if you go down to Florida, you go down to Texas, you can actually look on Google Maps and see their turbine, right? The full turbine. It's literally open air.
Oh, okay.
Right? So at the South Texas project, one of the 2 units, they had a feed water line freeze, a sensing line freeze, which caused the reactor to shut down. So there was no problem with the reactor safety. This was a problem with the input into the safety feature that caused the reactor to trip offline. They got it heated back up. They were back online within 24 hours and bringing power back, right? 24 hours, they went from, nothing, they went from, trip, which they were operating normally as the storm began. And then they were back online, right? And they were ramping back up. And then 48 hours, they were back full power production. Now, each wind turbine, you had to go through and de-ice each one individually. So now you can throw a bunch of teams at them, but you don't have crews that are assembled around the wind turbines, right? At a nuclear plant, you have an operators that are stationed right there, and they were available and ready to respond the second that happened. Because by law, they're required to. The nuclear NRC requires that. So by law, they had to have people. They found it. They had engineers that came in. Like they got that thing. We're talking rapid before they were back up and running. And then you look at the natural gas issue. The natural gas issue is that there are federal requirements that say that when there's a big storm that goes along, individual homes for heating get priority over power.
Okay.
So the natural gas stopped flowing because it got really cold and the demand went to the population who had natural gas heating, right? So now all of a sudden you don't have enough natural gas to pump to your facilities. So that's one of the things that people don't understand, recognize is that, our natural gas is not dedicated to power production, right? And so, and I agree, natural gas is an improvement over, say, coal as far as environmentally, but it's not an improvement when you look at it from how many people use natural gas. Like I have natural gas heating in my home, and fortunately where I live, if we have a major cold spell that were to shut down the wind turbines that are off the coast of Virginia Beach and the wind farms, and then the snow dumps on the solar and it doesn't work, right? So there is a band on the planet where solar is fairly effective, and it basically covers like Miami in the U.S. So
that's not good.
So it's like
I want to touch real quick on one thing. You had said that nuclear is cleaner than the solar farms. You had mentioned that or it's safer. I'm sorry. But my issue with the solar farms is they're horrible looking, and you have to put them outside of people's view. People get very, annoyed by them. So they want to, one report I read said they wanted to build one, like a massive one in the Mojave Desert, where it wouldn't affect people. And I just think that's ridiculous. To send power that far doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. So you're talking transmission losses. How much energy does it take to build those cables, to build the substations? You're jacking up the voltages, up to 500,000, a million volts, right? How does that impact wildlife, right? They have to do maintenance on those. That's one of the big issues in California is when there's rolling blackouts because they have insufficient power in peak hours, and they have rolling blackouts in the fall because they've got to shut the lines down because they don't maintain lines properly, and or maintain the air around it, and you get high winds and they have arcing, and all of a sudden it causes the trees to go up, or the brush to go up around it. Now you have big wildfires, right? So that's a big problem. Now here's the other thing.
Well, that's climate change, though. They keep telling us that.
Yeah, it's climate change, not cables causing those fires, which is the actual cause. Which otherwise, why would you shut them down? Right. So talking with large solar farms, right? So Australia built a 13,000 acre solar farm out in the middle of one of their deserts, right? It produces 2 gigawatts of energy at peak production. All right. Diablo Canyon out in California. It's on the coast. It uses 13 acres and also generates 2 gigawatts of energy.
See, that seems better to me.
Yes. Now, to make up the equivalent amount of energy in megawatt hours, it takes 5 of those solar farms.
Wow.
Because solar only has a capacity factor of 20%, meaning that it's only producing energy effectively 20% of the time. Nuclear produces energy essentially 100% of the time, except when you shut them down to refuel. Right, we shut them down to we're in refueling season. Where I'm at. We're about 3 weeks away from going into an outage where we'll shut the plant down to refuel one, and 6 months later we'll shut the other one down when it's fall. Right, that's just the standard cycle. And guess what? Power demand is at its lowest in the fall and spring because the temperatures are not too cold, they're not too warm. Right, so therefore you don't have the large demand on the power for keeping houses cool, for keeping houses hot or warm in the winter, right? So we can manage our shutdowns. That's one of the big things a lot of people don't understand is that when you talk about the wind not blowing and the sun not shining, is that I'm at the whim of the environment when you come to wind and solar. When it comes to other energy forms, I'm really at the desire of what do I want power to be at.
Right. Okay. So with nuclear, you had said that it's the least subsidized of all of the power out there, including drilling and everything. So I've always thought, because I didn't know that you would get 90 years of profit out of a reactor, but I did know that 40 to 50 years of profit was easily achievable with a nuclear unit. So is the biggest, if we had more subsidies for nuclear, would these private companies look at it as a long-term investment easier if they didn't have to absorb so much upfront cost and then wait so long to get a derivative from that?
I personally believe they would. And I think it's been, in the form of low interest loans from the Department of Energy to Southern that has kept the Vogtle project online. It's the only commercial nuclear reactor that's under construction, Vogtle units 3 and 4. Unit 3 goes online this year, Unit 4 goes online next year. Give you an idea, the licensing process started under the Bush administration early in his second term. So, 2005 was when they licensed the AP1000 reactor. I think 2008, they licensed the site. They started that's how long, these are long processes, which is unfortunate. Now, when you get into the advanced designs, you're seeing some crazy new changes. So I give you an idea, like just getting a design through the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they have a 3-year minimum time frame to do that.
Wow.
So on March 11th, which by the way is the anniversary of Fukushima in 2020, which was the day everything shut down. A company called Oklo, a little startup out of San Francisco, submitted the first ever combined operating license and construction license for their reactor design called the Aurora. The Aurora is a 1.5 megawatt reactor, so very small, right? You look at most reactors most nuclear reactors in the United States, they're 1,000 megawatts. So this is very small. That's about 1,000 homes of energy. Right? Quarter acre plant, quarter acre lot, and they're going to run on nuclear waste.
Well, that's actually very interesting. So, because that's one of the major arguments that goes around is what do we do with the spent fuel from these reactors? It's poisonous for millions of years and we can't just put it in the ground. And so it seems like, well, first of all, I've researched that enough to know that that's not entirely true. But it seems to me that using that spent fuel for another reactor is just a great idea.
So spent fuel is just fuel for fast reactors. So there's 2 types of reactors: thermal reactors, which is what every reactor in the U.S. uses right now, and there's fast reactors. So the fuel we use is uranium-235. Uranium-235 likes a thermal neutron, meaning it's a neutron at a lower energy state. And then a fast reactor operates off of plutonium. Plutonium likes a high energy neutron or a fast neutron. So all we're doing is we're just shifting fuels around and we change some coolant types. It's all physics to make it work. And we only use right now in the US, if you go out, we only use about less than 5% of the energy. I did rough math and figured out between our nuclear weapons, our depleted uranium that's used by the Army is, in Munich because it's heavy, munitions, tank armor, and then spent nuclear fuel. We have about, in the US, without mining, another ounce of uranium somewhere between 3 and 10,000 years of energy.
Wow.
If we convert it to 100% nuclear.
Right, I gotcha. Which they probably will never allow. One of the things that I've been interested in about nuclear is that despite all of the hiccups, despite the regulatory nightmare that you have to go through, a lot of people they see it as the future. They see it as the only green way forward to reach our demand and be able to increase that demand as we grow and use more energy. What's the number one thing that keeps nuclear from going, just haywire?
Honestly, it's probably the industry itself.
Okay.
We are our own worst enemies. We have we use the worst words, the worst marketing, the worst language. We're just really bad at all this stuff because we're a bunch of engineers, right? I don't know if there's a joke, how it's like between an introvert and an extrovert engineer is the extrovert's looking at your shoes. So we're a very engineer driven organization. So we don't know how to communicate. This is the easiest example I can use. If I told you that a reactor is critical, what does that mean to you? I know you've done some research, so you might actually know this, but if I said the word reactor is critical, what does that mean?
I wouldn't know from an engineering standpoint.
From a regular human standpoint, is that?
I would think that it's about to blow up.
Yeah. Okay. In the definition of reactor critical means it's K effective is 1, meaning for every neutron it's producing or it's consuming, it's producing 1 to replace it. It's stable. A reactor that is critical is operating stable.
Okay. That's terrible messaging.
Yeah, terrible words, right? Terrible words. And that's the big problem, is that when you look at, nuclear, and then anybody who has any kind of an okay idea with this is running around with freaking, polar bears, named Melty the Bear with signs that say only you, the atomic symbol for uranium, can, save climate change or solve climate change.
Right.
It's like, this is so terrible. Oh, I cringed the first time I saw that. So, we're so desperate that anybody who has an idea, good or bad, we just go, oh my God, I'm looking at his shoes and this is amazing, right? Because we're totally introverts. And that's part of the reason why, through my ability, I managed to get, guys like, I got Naval Ravikant on nuclear energy. I got Scott Adams in nuclear energy to try and rebrand it. If you actually look in, I think it was 2019, April 1st to 3rd, the Dilbert comic series actually had a whole series on Dilbert walking around with a little baby reactor in his hand. And it goes through the exact same things about, it's completely safe, won't melt down, it's charging my phone right now. And, it won't cost anything. And it's like, I'm sorry, the cost is going to go from $1 per unit to $2. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. Like, okay. like it's just, it's crazy and mind blowing, when you think about how, nuclear energy is truly demonized. And it's demonized partly because, you have Greenpeace that they fought to get rid of the nuclear weapons, and nuclear weapons proliferation treaties occurred. They need a new bogeyman. And so they went for nuclear energy because it's the same type of thing. And then the oil and gas industry goes, hey, why don't we just pump some money into this because we don't want competition. So it's interesting watching all of that unfold. And, there is so much great new technology coming out there. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but the Perseverance rover, the rover that landed on Mars last month, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nuclear powered, right?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so it's got a nuclear battery on there. I mean, you're a smart guy, right? I'm sure most of your followers knew that. But I mean, to think, the amount of things that we put that are nuclear powered into space, and the Oklo reactor, by the way, is based on the kilopower reactor, which is a demonstration reactor they proved out in Nevada that is going to be used for lunar and Martian missions for colonies. Just an upgraded version of that. So, by the way, the kilopower reactor is the size of any fridge and would power 4 homes for 20 years.
That's awesome.
So I mean,
one of the things that I've always told people when I try to have a conversation with with if they're very much into wind and solar, it's very difficult to have the conversation. But sometimes you can get through to them, and I'll usually ask them, "Okay, what's the number one concern you have with nuclear power?" And the answer is always the same: it's dangerous. And so my response to them is, someone should tell the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the exact number, but I do believe a large portion of the U.S. Navy fleet is nuclear.
100% of the submarines, 100% of the aircraft carriers.
Okay, so and if people knew that,
Yep.
maybe they'd go, "Whoa, well, that doesn't make sense," you know.
So, and to give you an idea, right? I knew I was when I was 17 years old. I knew I wanted to work in nuclear energy. Had no idea the Navy had nuclear powered ships.
And there's a lot of people that still don't.
Yeah, no idea. And I wanted to work in the nuclear industry in high school, so I had no idea that they were nuclear powered. And like when the Navy recruiter called me up and I said, would you enjoy the Navy? He said, only if you have a nuclear power program. Sarcastic, thinking like they don't, why would you need nuclear power on ships? And the guy goes, boy, do I have a deal for you. And 20 years, 20 years
and a
later,
career was born.
Yeah, I mean, so no joke with that. There is enough of that. My favorite comment I get is, I'll post up something about, well, would you want that in your backyard? I said, well, I've slept over 100 feet of multiple reactors. So yeah, I have a problem with that. And then people are like, what do you mean? I said, I was in the Navy. I slept next to my equipment. Now there were areas we weren't allowed to sleep because, you want to, it's called a LARA, as low as reasonably cheap. We want to minimize your radiation exposure. Mm-hmm. So we didn't sleep in those areas, right? We had areas that were designated to sleep, but it was within 100 feet of the reactor. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, people talk about, and we're going to jump into the accidents because we have to talk about the accidents because we don't talk about accidents, all come up as disingenuous and not credible. So I like talking about, the amount of radiation exposure that people received at the accidents. 3 Mile, right? The worst workers at the plant received 100 millirem dealing with the accident. I received 141 millirem. Here's my official letter from the NRC stating that I received 0.141 rem, which is 141 millirem, less than what the workers received in 1979 when they were going way over those numbers, and they were getting 1,000 millirem a year because there's way more controls put in place, right? So in an accident, they received 100 millirem. The population received about 3.2 millirem if they lived immediately surrounding Chernobyl. 3 Mile
Island. Yeah.
Right? You go to the dentist, they give you 2 to 4 x-rays. Each one of those is 3 millirem. Right? You get like 12 doing a cross-country flight. Pilots receive more radiation exposure than I do.
Okay.
Right? But they don't have to monitor it because it's created by the large nuclear reactor in the middle of our solar system called the sun, right?
Yeah.
So that's a fact, right? Then you look at Fukushima. Fukushima, 4 reactors blew up, 3 melted down. The 4th blew up because their reactors were in pair. Hydrogen gas was generated. It blew up 2 of them. They blew up in pairs, really. Gotcha. They were trying to vent the gas into the other reactor to prevent the explosion. But 0 people killed at Fukushima. The explosions and the evacuations that killed people were caused by the government of Japan. In the U.S., the way that the regulations are written is that the utility has the authority to release to the environment if it's going to make the decision. It is better for the health and safety of the public to give them a small amount of radiation dose than to have the reactor explode in an event like Fukushima.
Right.
They make that decision because then when you explode, you're just going to put it all out there, right? A little bit of tritium, right? Which, by the way, I'm drinking water right here in my cup. There's tritium in your water, so I'm going to drink, which is, by the way, the same thing. It's a thermonuclear weapon, so I'm going to drink some nuclear fuel right here.
Okay. Well, mine's coffee, but it has water in it.
Which has hydrogen. Hydrogen 3 is tritium. Boom, right? There you go. Now you've consumed tritium as well. Everyone will consume tritium today. We're all radioactive too. So the government, the city or the prefecture or whatever, mayor of Fukushima said, no, you cannot vent that hydrogen gas into the atmosphere. Hydrogen gas, hydrogen deuterium, tritium. Those are all hydrogen forms of hydrogen, right? Because they were concerned there would be too much exposure to tritium, which is small quantities, very not as big of a deal as you would think. If they would have vented it, there would have been no explosion. The response would have been, you still would have melted the 3 reactors down.
Okay.
Right. But then because of the explosion, yeah, we'll get to how the U.S. would have never, since the 90s, would have had a Fukushima event too. So then they created this exclusion zone. They evacuated all these people rapidly, right? And then all these people are in ICUs, elderly, and they died in transport. So they could have taken their time and said, you know what, a little bit of radiation exposure, right? The average American gets like 250 milligram a year, right?
I'm sure
remember I said I got 141 milligram from working on top of the 250 I get naturally.
Okay.
Right. So I understand that my overall exposure for the year was 400 milligram. Right. But the average American the average human gets like 250 milligram, depending on what your activity, you get more or less, right? If you live in a brick house, you get, more because there's, heavy elements in there. So just understanding the amount of radiation that you get. And, Fukushima, so the big issue with Fukushima is that they have their safety systems were underground. The units, the Fukushima Daiichi reactor, by the way, they had 10 units total in Fukushima. There was the Daiichi, which were 6, and there was Daini, which I believe was further south, which was 4. You hear nothing about Fukushima Daini because its seawall, it was built later, but Daiichi means 1 in Japanese, Daini means number 2.
Yeah.
By the way. So their seawall was higher so that the tsunami didn't come over and wash out their systems.
I got
so
you.
When they were licensed, they didn't, and their version of the NRC didn't require them to build up their seawall. And by the way, they tried to blame it on TEPCO. Turns out you don't have laws in place. They follow all the regulations. They follow all the requirements as written by your regulations. The government can't convict anyone. 0 people were found at fault because they followed every requirement that the Japanese government set forth. So, but their seawall went in and washed out their safety systems, which is down in the basement. That's pretty common because if you look, in plants around, even in the U.S., right, they're designed around, literally containment structures are designed to take a telephone pole traveling at 200 miles an hour in a freaking tornado to crash into it and not damage the containment structure. Right.
Okay.
So that's why you put your safety systems underground so the telephone pole could strike the building and it's not going to damage it. Right. That's the missile requirement. So what the U.S. did was like, hey, in the 90s, they go, you know what? We see flooding, the Fukushima event, as a problem. Mm-hmm. So we're going to mandate that all of our utilities install what's called a blackout diesel. So in the event that you have something that's going to cause the offsite power, your rack shuts down, your offsite power, you lose it, you have a diesel that is separate from all your emergency systems that's up high. Mm-hmm. It's not missile rated. So in the event of a tornado, guess what? That diesel, it may take a freaking telephone pole at 200 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Which is
you
fine,
might lose
right?
it.
You might lose it, but your other system should be still okay, right? Because it's a tornado, not a tsunami.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say Diablo Canyon, that tsunami, we had that earthquake. It occurred off of the coast of California. The tsunami came in, it washed out, caused that same thing to occur at Diablo Canyon, which is on the coast of California. Their blackout diesel, which was installed in the 90s, would have kept on. They could have provided cooling, would have never had any meltdowns. A month later, they'd have been back online. Okay. So the U.S. saw this happen and took action, right? So this is one of those where, I'm bash on governments, and I'm going to say the government's okay in some cases. I know that gets frustrating with the libertarian crowd, but
my issue with government is not that it exists; it's that it's massive.
Yes,
it's just way too big. They got their fingers in everything, and that's irritating to me.
So you might actually like the NRC being the libertarian guy. Did you know that it is 100% funded by the utilities?
I did not know that, but I like that. And I want to touch on that really quick because I constantly hear, taxes. We got to have all this. Well, you just told me we have a regulatory body that the private market completely funds. And even though that regulatory body has power over the market that's funding it. So it's obvious that you don't need government necessarily to take from me to give to someone else to regulate me again. It doesn't. Someone's in there. There's a middleman that we don't need.
Yeah.
So
so the NRC is the one who issues the licenses, and they provide the regulatory oversight, make sure that everyone's meeting the laws. Now, one of the other things, the nuclear industry has a self-regulatory, so the NRC is by the government. The government is in charge of it. They're government employees, all funded by the utility. And then the nuclear industry also funds a private organization called the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. So they take a second pot of money and they throw it out there and they say, hey, we want you to basically grade us, evaluate us, and make sure that we are not going to ever take fines from the NRC. They grade all the different utilities. So let's say you've got Dominion owns, like a half dozen reactors. You've got, Southern Company owns a bunch, Exelon, Entergy. Then you got Palo Verde, which is its own. You've got, PG, and all these different companies own these different reactors. And they take these sites and they'll do these audits. INPO will. And INPO will do these audits, and it's made up of teams from these other utilities. Well, they're all the reactors, individual reactors. So Palo Verde is 3 reactors, right? And so each one has its own grade. Each one individually. And so now Palo Verde is having an audit being done on their reactors, and they've got guys from Duke, they've got guys from Entergy, guys from INPO Corporate that are coming in and doing the audit. Do you think Duke wants Palo Verde to have a good grade?
No, they're competitors.
Yeah. So they've driven competition into turning an industry that in the 1970s was the wild, wild west, right? Going back to 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island was not the worst reactor when the meltdown occurred. It was the one that had the problem that caused the meltdown. There were reactors that were far gone. There are stories of needing boats to get around the basements of the containment where the reactors are because there was just feet of water in the bottom of these things. They weren't maintaining equipment. This is the 70s and 80s, mind you, right?
Right.
And then, 3 Mile Island happens. They create INPO. The industry was afraid to say their problems because why would I bring up my problems, right? Because then everyone's going to laugh at me. I'm going to be, we're really laughing stock. And then this happens, and now it's like, what are your problems? What is this issue? What is that issue? And then we train on them, right? We have these little handbooks at work where it's literally filled with what we call operating experience. And it's like, at Watts Bar, at this, at that, and it tells you all these things. And the number one, there are 2 reactors that we talk about the most. Fukushima actually is in a bunch of them because it was such a natural disaster as opposed to a human error. Most of our operating experience is based on human performance issues. But we talk all the time about Chernobyl, which was a major human performance, again, government problem. We'll get into that in a second. And then 3 Mile Island. And so, we want to learn from these things. And again, going with that government overreach. So Chernobyl's a fun accident to talk about. I mean, it's terrible because, 50 people lost their lives. Right? But
we just went back to that marketing thing. It's a fun accident to talk about.
No, it's fun from a how to understand how fear, the government, and allowing the wrong people having oversight of what's going on. Right. So at the time, we were in the height of the Cold War, right? And the Russians were concerned about what would happen at one of their RBMK facilities. RBMK is the type of reactor that was at Chernobyl. There's still several of them online. They're shutting down, I think, in the coming decade. They have no containment structure, right? So in the event you had a Chernobyl accident occur in the U.S., which our reactors can't do, it would be contained inside the containment, right? Like the reactor would explode, be inside the containment, it would be held in there. So our reactors can't do that. B, we have a containment that they didn't have. So you required those 2 missing elements from a government oversight agency that actually cared about the public, which really the utilities do care about the public because, hey, they're selling to the public.
Right. You don't want to kill your customers.
Yes. So the Soviet government was concerned about the U.S. attacking and taking out the switch yards, not attacking the reactors, because no country in the right mind is going to destroy a reactor. Right. Because that's stupid. Because it's good infrastructure if you want to come in and be a conquering, because we're still We're talking, 60s, 70s, 80s time frame. And so they were concerned about taking out the switch yard, right? That loss of offsite power. So they ran a test to see if they tripped or if the reactor was at low power they were losing power as the steam was coming on, they could roll the turbine down so that their emergency systems could pick back up. So literally they were trying to they were seeing if their systems installed, this test they were doing, to prove that they could prevent a meltdown in the event of losing their switch yard.
Oh, no.
Right? So
Okay.
you see where that whole
okay.
Okay. All the best of intentions. Now you understand why I say this is a fun thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it literally starts out with the best of intentions and goes south poorly. There were 3 other sites that had said they were asked to do. They were saying, "Hey, we need to do this test," and they're like, "No, we're not.
We're not.
No, this is a bad idea." And then I'm not sure it was KGB, some high level agent was like at the Chernobyl site was like, "You're doing it." And it was literally down the line. I don't know if you noticed, there were 4 units operational at the time and then 2 under construction. Literally goes down the line. Unit 1, nope, we're not doing it. Unit 2, nope, we're not doing it. Unit 3, nope, we're not doing it. Unit 4, you're doing it. No, we don't want to know. You're going to do this. And it's like, but we don't think this is a good idea. And then they have this. They have the turbine engineer, which isn't a nuclear engineer, who was in charge of the test. And then they're removing safety. They're overriding safety features, and it's like, so when you look at it from they were so desperate to get this test done out of fear that they put themselves into a situation where we've got to get this test done no matter what, right? Everyone else said no. We're the last one. Right? Unit 4, Chernobyl, we're the last one that's going to do this test. Well, the way their reactors designed, they were dropping out in power and they could be in a certain power band. So they kept having to withdraw their control rods. Well, they're by design, they're required to have X number of control rods inserted as a minimum. And they said, well, we got to withdraw them because we got to get this test done. We got to get this test done. The test is more important instead of aborting the test because they've got this government agent. You got to get this test done. You got to get this test done. And ultimately, they withdrew them all, and
boom.
Well, they withdrew them all, and then they saw a problem, and then they had a method where basically the rods weren't driving in because they were basically developing a giant machine brush was pushing them out, and they did what's called they had a mechanism to drive them in, and they went to use a hydraulic portion to push them in, and that removed enough of the physical force that was holding them in place that it then caused them to shoot out, which caused a giant spike in power, which then caused a giant steam explosion. By the way, if you look at Fukushima and Chernobyl, and even 3 Mile, and if you look at the SL1 accident, which is fascinating, U.S.'s Chernobyl, if you will. The problem with all those reactors is they were water cooled.
Okay.
So water is very difficult because steam does not conduct heat very well.
Right.
Water conducts heat great. But there's a point when there's a temperature at which water will no longer stay water. It will try to become steam, no matter what. No matter how much pressure, it's going to become steam. I'm sorry. That's just a fact.
Yeah, right? There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. So when you look at advanced reactor designs, if you look at the Aurora we talked about, it uses heat pipes. So there's no water, and there's no water at all in that reactor.
They just vent that heat.
It uses a heat pipe, like in your computer, like for
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and then it goes to a CO2 supercritical carbon dioxide generator. So it heats CO2 that turns a turbine, and then its heat sink is just a radiator, air cooled radiator.
Oh, okay.
So there's no water in that reactor design at all.
So you're not going to get the steam issue.
Yeah, you can't. There's no steam.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah, the hydrogen gas at Fukushima was created because of what's known as the Zerk water reaction, where zirconium in the presence of steam at a high temperature splits into oxygen and hydrogen together, right? That's where hydrogen gas came from. That's a bomb.
Yeah, exactly.
So and by the way, there is. I mentioned this one, and I'm not afraid to steer to talk about the accidents. In the U.S., we had our Chernobyl event in 1961. It was called
Okay.
SL1. It was a Army reactor out in Idaho, and whether it was through sabotage, miscommunication, they basically withdrew their control rods too far, and the reactor exploded, and all 3 operators died. It was 2 Army and a Navy guy, and the explosion was so. And give you an idea how early in nuclear power this was. Their control rods were manually operated. We use switches now with automatic features that control things. They literally use like hand cranks at this point. and I mean the accident is terrible. And one of the guys, it took 3 days to find him because he was physically pinned to the ceiling.
Wow.
So I am not afraid to talk about the accidents. I bring up the big.
Well, and I think that's really good because from the first of all, I'd never even heard of that one. I don't think most people have, unless they're nuclear engineers or look into it.
That was swept under the rug by the father of the nuclear Navy, Admiral Hammond G. Rickover. He did the investigation and said, "Sweep that thing right under there."
That's shocking. The government would hide something.
Good. So, by the way, the nuclear industry talks of reverence about Admiral Rickover, and I think he's an asshole.
Nice.
So
I like that. Where I wanted to go with there was when politicians talk about a lot of this kind of stuff, it's very irritating to me because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Like some aide gives them a couple, talking points or whatever, and they talk about it, and the public, for whatever reason, goes, "Oh well, it's fine," or "It's bad," and they never look into it. They never, and that's just so irritating to me. I don't understand. That's one of the reasons I love the internet, is because it allowed conversations like this take the politicians out of the game because they don't seem to give a crap about people.
It is amazing, and I don't know if you've seen the shift, but I've seen the shift in the last couple of years towards a more pro-nuclear stance. And
I've seen it from one side a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I would say that it's the centrists in the government, right? And whether or not you think that Cory Booker and Amy Klobuchar are centrists, when it comes to energy, they're very centrist. Right. They're pro-nuclear. Then you've got Lamar Alexander, I think Murkowski, right? At least this is the previous Congress. I'm not sure. I haven't done as much deep diving. You get 4 senators that signed up to a bill. Joe Manchin is pro-nuclear.
Yeah,
right?
I knew that.
And then Capito, I think is the other West Virginia senator. West Virginia cannot build nuclear, but their senators are pro-nuclear.
Yeah, I mean, that's not on a federal level, that's the state.
That's a West Virginia law. Yeah, West Virginia law says they have to have, written because of the coal plants. They have to have a national repository. Hopefully Holtec gets licensed and we'll have an MEA repository. Once that's there, you can build them in West Virginia. West Virginia is, by the way, primed for new nuclear construction because they have some of the best laws for construction. They're a prime location as far as if you look at where Loudoun County is. Loudoun County is right across the border from West Virginia. That's where Amazon and Microsoft and basically 80% of the U.S. internet traffic goes through Loudoun County, Virginia. So,
well, then that would be a great spot to build a plant.
Literally right across the border. There's a couple of rivers right there. You could throw a bunch of large reactors up there. It's ideal. Plus Dominion is in charge of that area of West Virginia. Dominion owns 5 reactor sites, 4 of which are operational. So they have existing nuclear understanding and experience. So, I mean, it's really a great state, I think, to do that. And I actually got the opportunity to speak with their Speaker of the House of Delegates about nuclear power in West Virginia. So they're talking about trying to repeal those laws in West Virginia.
Which would be good for them.
Yes. So, yeah. And going back to the whole discussion about the centrists, right? So the way I look at nuclear is that when you look at most issues in the U.S., it's left versus right? And you've got, all the left on one side, all the right on one side, and then you got a couple of people that are, back and forth. And when you come to nuclear energy, I like to call it more of an up versus down. It's the centrist versus the extremists, right? So it's only oil and gas are aligned with the It's Only Wind and Solar group, which,
Gotcha.
by the way, are the same people.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but BP, Chevron, all those big oil and gas companies, they know and they're promoting wind and solar.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know that.
So,
you know, I've worked in the oil field most of my life. My family still does. I've got a brother down in Texas working in the oil field. We know the games they play. You know,
yeah.
They want to keep this fight going. At one point, I was having a conversation with a natural gas engineer, and he brought it up that they had a meeting where they were going to spend marketing dollars for wind and solar. And this is a natural gas company.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And he goes, because if we don't, people are going to figure out nuclear is better. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I have said that wind and solar are welfare for oil and gas.
They are. Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
that's really what it is. I mean, flat out. I mean, your wind farms only work 20% of the time. Your wind farms work 40% of the time. Your solar farms only work for 20% of the time. And every time you build one of these wind farms and solar farms, you have to build a backup, power plant.
Yeah.
Right. So the government pays for the wind and solar. The government is paying for it, and the utility says, "Well, I'll put this natural gas thing on, and I'll generate power." I mean,
Right.
and here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that when you look at like a coal, oil, or gas plant, right, their largest cost is fuel and materials, right? 80% of their cost goes into material, 20% into people, right? It's a reverse for a nuclear power plant. 80% of the cost of a nuclear power plant is people, 20% is materials.
Well, that sounds like a better plan, especially if you're pro worker. I would think that would they'd go, well, we want to do it that way. I mean, it's better, it's cleaner, it's safer. And I want to say, when I was saying that one side has started to publicly be more pro nuclear, I wasn't talking about politicians. I was talking about voting bloc that the voters of right of center have started to come and say, okay, well, this is way safer technology than it was in the 70s. We're not going to have another 3 Mile Island situation. This is the future. It's much cheaper. It's better. And that's what I mean. Which I think that's good, because if the voting bloc gets that way and they start screaming, this is what we want, politicians want to keep their job. So, they can flip flop on things. They do it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a question, and I'm sure the answer is going to shock most people that watch this. How many active nuclear power plants do we have in America?
94.
94. Okay. That's a
reactors.
little bit less. Right.
That's reactors. At our peak, we're at 120. And now that is commercial reactors. That does not include any of the universities that have reactors. So there's probably another 25 there. That does not include any of the test reactors at the national laboratories. There's probably another 25 there. And then you get the United States Navy. That's another 100 reactors. So probably overall, the U.S. has about 250 operating reactors.
Okay. Now, that runs about how much power? I mean, for people's heads, about how much power is generated from the 94 that are active?
1/5 of the power in the U.S. is generated from nuclear energy.
From just those 94?
Just those 94.
Wow.
And each year, so we were at peak 120. And so here's something else interesting, right? If you put in a wind and solar farm, over time they degrade, right?
Yeah.
They don't generate as much power.
Right.
In 2020, the nuclear industry set a new record for power generation. They set it. So
it's increasing power.
Yes, they're keeping the reactors online longer. Their outages are shorter. And then the other thing is they're able to uprate the reactors. There is a company called Lightbridge that they have a new fuel design that they could take an existing reactor that exists in the U.S. right now. They can extend their outages from every 18 months to every 24 months and increase power output by 17%.
Okay. You had mentioned the Aurora project. Okay, and you said that's big enough to run about 1,000 houses, and it takes up about a quarter of an acre. You had said that it uses recycled fuel or
Yep.
whatever. So would the future of nuclear energy, is it going to be small plants like that are close to where the power is necessary, or is it going to be large, operations, or will it be both?
So it's going to be a mix. If you look
Okay.
internationally right now, you've got India, China, and Russia are the big builders of nuclear power plants around the planet. I think just recently they're fueling a reactor up in Norway. UAE's got their second reactors going to go online this year. Egypt's building 4 new. These are all large-scale reactor projects. China and Russia are building a bunch of smaller reactors, a bunch of advanced designs that are going to run on nuclear waste. So right now there's 450 reactors around the world. There's like another 55 under construction that are primarily of the U.S. style of a pressurized water or boiling water reactor that uses that thermal fuel. The Russians actually have a large scale reactor that runs on plutonium. It's running up this in 2021 when it does. I think it just did its outage that completely. It transferred from nuclear weapons, is what it started on, and now it's running on nuclear waste.
Oh, well,
so
good.
It destroyed nuclear weapons material to where it's no longer able to be nuclear weapons, and now it's running purely on nuclear waste. It's a molten sodium reactor. They've got a molten lead reactor they're building. In the U.S. right now, you have a couple of large scale reactors that are licensed. We're building the 2 down in Georgia. There's about another 6 or so licenses for the AP1000. That's the type of reactor that they're licensed for. There's another reactor design called the Economic Simplified Boiling Water Reactor, which is licensed to build in a couple of places. There are a lot of licenses that exist. There's even a license that's from the 1970s that we could still finish out in Bellefonte, Alabama. Like,
really?
Yes, it was just renewed to complete the construction of a
So
reactor.
is it just a funding issue then? Is that why you've got all these licenses out there and not that many projects?
It is. It's a funding issue, and the utilities are about making money selling electricity. Right. So they don't necessarily want to put, again, you're a CEO, you're a CFO, you're COO, you're going to be in that job for about 5 years. So you got a 5-year plan. A nuclear plant is, going to be 15 years minimum, right? Before you're profitable. So if you're 15 years, so you're profitable, you're looking at like, the guys that are, not even directors that are managers, if that guy's pushing, well, that guy has no power. So that's part of the problem. And so when you do these smaller designs, so now you're talking factory construction, because right now when we're building it, they're like a castle, right? But we kind of want something that's somewhere between a cat. We want a mobile castle. That's what we want. We want something we can put in,
the security of a castle.
Build the security of a castle, but we build the reactor and we plop it in, right? And that's what they're coming to. And by the way, these companies, they're working with the shipyards that do this for a living. Because I don't know if these submarines up here, right? That you see USS Washington up above my head. That submarine, 40% of it, and every submarine in the Virginia class fleet were all built at Newport News. And 40% of that submarine and every other one in the fleet were built up in Electric Boat in London, Connecticut. New London, Connecticut. And then the remaining 20% of the submarine is built at whatever shipyard's delivering, and they alternate delivering submarines. So they ship this stuff back and forth. They're shipping giant modules. So we know how to do this, The propulsion skids are all where the turbines and electrical generators and main engines are. Those are built up at Electric Boat. So when the submarine Washington, which was built down in Newport News, that was shipped on a barge down, then it was loaded into the freaking vessel, and then connected, tested, and operates great. So, we know how to do all this stuff. And that's part of the thing is that let's say that I build a factory and I'm building Auroras that are 1.5 megawatt reactors. Well, they're using a 1.5 megawatt SCO2 generator that's off the shelf. So then they have, 4 or 5 different vendors that are building different parts. They build it, test it to the best of their ability, bring it together. You do your integrated testing, bring your reactor online. Your longest lead in anything is now going to be your infrastructure in place at the site. How long does it take to build a house on a quarter acre with a basement? Not very long.
Oh, I mean, depending on if you've got a really good contractor, they can do it in 3 months.
Yeah, right. So now you're thinking Aurora, quarter acre, right? We're going to say it's going to take a year because,
Right.
why not? So it
Well,
takes
and
a
you
year.
have a little more safety stuff than a house would
Yep.
need.
And so you're building your foundation, all that stuff, and then you bring all your stuff in, put it together, slap it together. 2 years, you have a reactor instead of 8.
Gotcha.
So 2 years building a reactor, and then it's profitable because you're not doing 8 years of spending money. You got
Right.
8 years to pay that all back. Now in 2 years, now you're within that 5-year point for that CFO.
So you might get that CFO to come on board because they're going to get to go to the board and say, "Look at all this profit I made you,"
and the other
or all
thing
the profit you're going to make.
Yeah.
So
well, and then the other thing is that when you look at it from a standpoint of these large scale reactors, well, I do an environmental impact statement. These things are huge demands on the environment. I'm going to heat the river. I'm going to I'm sucking up a bunch of water. I got to worry about freaking oysters and clams and the catfish and
Right.
all this stuff. Well, I don't need to do that for a little tiny reactor.
Exactly.
Or if I do, it's going to be minimal. And then when you look at, well, what is the access? One of the things that's interesting about the Aurora design is that, I've spoke with their COO and their CEO, and they're like, we're actually submitting accidents that this reactor can undergo. It's just easier to get it through the NRC.
Really?
Yeah. Like,
well,
we could change it, but I mean, we've already made them make so many changes that we'll give them one. Like
that's pretty smart on their part.
I mean, and I've been talking with Caroline, was interesting. She goes, we're trying to figure out whether or not we have to have someone there.
Nice.
Like whether we have someone staffed 24/7. We basically conceded that we'll have a security /operator. And I'm like, well, that makes sense because you're going to, my vision, and this is, me and you were talking about the voters and talking about how the center right is now super pro-nuclear. I'm going to take.
Well, they're coming. They're coming.
Yeah,
super
pro-nuclear. I'm going to take credit for a lot of that because when the Green New Deal came out, I created what I call the Green Nuclear Deal. Right. Got a lot of exposure with all that. And one of the things that I see in my vision is that I go everywhere I look for substations because there's always a quarter acre plot next to a substation. Always.
Yeah.
You go to a substation, there's this quarter acre. I could plop an Aurora there. I could stick a breaker that goes into that thing, and now I've got power into that substation. Yeah. Every substation is
right next door.
Yep, and you're going back to that whole thousands of gallons of fuel in those wind turbines. There's thousands of gallons of fuel or of oil in those transformers. You look at those transformers, it's like a giant cylinder that's high up. That's full of oil.
Oh yeah.
Right. So now if I got a security guard whose job is to monitor that reactor, they can go in every day and look in that switch yard, make sure that all the the transformers and the breakers and all that stuff, everything looks good, and they can step back out. And
well, there you go. You're building jobs.
I looked at it from a safety standpoint, right? Because then if there's a fire, right? Because right now, if there's, they see arcing and sparking, they don't know, the people nearby, or the substation might be out in the middle of nowhere. It might be, fully engulfed switch yard before, the fire department comes, and they're waiting on the utility to shut off power. Because by the way, you don't enter a switch yard while there's still electricity going to it.
Yeah.
So they're going to wait. They're going to let it burn until, they get confirmation from the utility that they've put out the, they've secured power to it.
Right.
If you have a guy there and that happens, they're already on the phone with the.
Yeah, it's immediate. So, which would also save money long term because if they can shut it down faster, it's less repairs than it being fully burnt down. So that makes a lot of sense. And, anything that creates jobs is good for politicians if they can get behind it. Especially what I would assume would be a pretty well-paying job overall. If you're guarding a nuclear reactor,
The highest paid blue collar jobs in the U.S. and on the planet are in the nuclear industry.
Yeah, I would imagine they would be. It makes sense.
I know guys with high school diplomas that are making $250,000 a year.
Well, all right. Anyone watching this, maybe it's time for a career change out there. Before we're coming up on an hour, I like to usually stay right about there. That's how long you can keep people's attention. But I do want to go just for fun. In the future, do I have a nuclear reactor sitting outside my house the size of my AC unit or no?
No.
No?
No,
Is
no.
it not feasible, too dangerous, or?
Unfortunately, and I'm going to use X-ray machines is the big issue here. So if you look at all the nuclear industry actually includes X-rays as well. Almost all the radiation deaths in the U.S. and worldwide have been caused by technicians improperly operating on X-ray equipment and killing them, overexposing themselves. And that's the big thing is that as much as I would love for that, and I think it'd be great, the lack of oversight. I think of my buddy down the street, BJ, who's amazing. He's awesome, but he would totally tinker with it and kill himself with radiation exposure.
Okay.
Just because there are people that are like that. That's the reason why.
They're the kind of people that when it says don't push the button, they push the button.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reason why I don't see it. I do think there's potential for nuclear powered trains. I think it's probably the smallest vehicle we'll ever get to is probably train level. We'll never get to semis though.
Okay.
That's my vision.
Right.
That's what I'm seeing. And that's kind of the way the industry kind of thinks too. And they had a design for nuclear powered train in the 50s too, by the way.
Wow. And just never got off the ground, or?
It was just paper.
Oh, I got you. All right, Mark. Well, this has been great. We're going to let you get out of here on that. I would very much like to have you back on in the future if you want to come on, and we'll just talk about, what's going on. We didn't get to your exercise stuff. We'll have to do that next time. But I do follow that on Twitter. Follow your journey there. In the description, I've got Mark's Twitter. Follow him. You can, hit him up, ask him questions about nuclear. And then is there anything else that anywhere people can go to follow you or help you out with your stuff?
I've had consolidated back on there as well. So yeah,
okay.
I had some other stuff I was working on, but unfortunately pandemic and I kind of ended it. So
yeah, that makes sense. All right, Mark, this has been great. I really appreciate it, bud.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah. Anytime.